there will be interpretation in 24 different languages of this panel, so everyone here in the room should have some sort of like headset. No? Oh, okay, it's not me. Yeah, so you will have interpretation, 24 different languages. If you're looking for English interpretation, it should be channel number 2. Okay, so far so good. Let's get to it. I'd like to introduce you to our 3 panelists of today. Starting with India. India Burgess is head of advocacy at the UK-based think tank Autonomy. She is responsible for connecting Autonomy's research with partners and stakeholders, and is also a member of the organization's shorter working week consultation team. What all of that means, you'll find out in a bit. Secondly, we have Sean Illau from Malta. He's a tech entrepreneur from Malta and leads several metaverse-focused projects. He says his company, Metaverse Architects, uses ChatGPT to brainstorm code, prepare articles, and ideate new projects. Super interesting. We'll be hearing more from him. And lastly, I'd like to introduce our MEP, Christophe Groudler. He has been a member of the European Parliament since 2019. In the European Parliament, he has been involved with the Renew Europe group on the energy transition, on the European space policy, and the digital sovereignty of the EU. Mr. Groudler advocates for more made in Europe. As he says, it's better to produce locally for jobs and for the climate. I'm very happy to have all 3 of you here with such diverse perspectives on this panel. Thank you very much. Before I get to the panelists, I have a question for you, the audience, here in the room. Who here in the room would like to, at some point in their lives, work a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day work week? That's what I thought. I love it. Great. Okay, so I hope that everyone who's joining online also could see it. There were many hands. Is there anyone who's working, who's already doing like a 4-day work week? Would you raise your hand? Great. Okay, thank you. I mean, you just saw me raising my hand. I am, and it's a very rare incident for me, a very rare incident to find me anywhere other than like on the sofa, like watching Netflix on a Friday afternoon. Technically, today would be my day off, but I made an exception for this event, which is great, and can now use my very own experience to smoothly transition to my first question. India, your think tank, Autonomy UK, recently published the results of what's considered to be one of the biggest trials for a 4-day work week that was conducted in the UK. Can you talk us through your findings?
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Is that working? Great. Okay, cool. Yeah, so hi everyone. As Lucas said, then Autonomy, to give a bit of context, last year alongside some other organisations, including the 4-Day Week Campaign UK, 4-Day Week Global, and the universities of Cambridge and Boston, ran the world's largest private sector 4-Day Week pilot in the world. It ran for 6 months between June and December 2022. 61 companies took part, so that was around 2,900 employees, and the results were published in February. So we tracked a number of different qualitative and quantitative metrics throughout the trial, and the results were overwhelmingly really positive. So 92% of the companies have kept on the 4-day week, either in an extended trial or keeping it on permanently as a 4-day week. And there were kind of a range of different benefits that we saw, both for the employees, which might be kind of obvious, but then also for the businesses themselves. So from the employee perspective, we saw obviously benefits from people having more free time, you know, less stressed, more time for hobbies, life admin, care responsibilities, all of those sorts of things. We saw a 71% reduction in self-reported burnout, so from being overly stressed. And we also found from this employees surveyed that 15%, so 15%, of people said that no salary could make them go back to working a 5-day week in the future, which is really interesting. And then from the business's perspective, obviously having a happy workforce is good for a business, because your workforce is a really important part of your business for most organisations, though Sean might talk about that a bit more later in relation to AI. But so happy workforce is great. We saw the businesses had a 57% reduction in staff turnover, so fewer people were leaving the business, and therefore they were saving money through not having to hire new staff. And we also saw in the organisations that we monitored that there was a 35% increase in revenue compared to the same 6 months the previous year. So kind of no net negative impact on the majority of the organisations, and in many cases really quite positive impact. So overall, yeah, a really positive outcome.
Great, sounds good. And all the numbers are very impressive. And I mean, considering that almost everybody here in the room would like to work a 4-day work week, does that mean that we will all be working 4-day weeks soon?
So obviously I think that would be great, and we obviously hope so, and that's what Autonomy's kind of research and the work we do is aiming for. So yeah, 4-day weeks with no loss in pay. But there are obviously a number of challenges to getting there. So one that we've encountered so far is how it's currently being rolled out. So at the moment, in the majority of cases, it's companies voluntarily moving to a 4-day week. So they think, you know, we can do this, it's not going to harm our operations, it would be great for employees, so let's give it a go, which runs the risks of leaving behind certain other sectors where it's perceived to be harder to move to a 4-day week. So things like construction, manufacturing, healthcare, education. Then if it's all just companies voluntarily doing it, then there may be certain organisations and employees that get left behind. So to help overcome that, then we really need to see trade union support and also government support for rolling these things out. And that is starting to happen some places in Spain and in the Spanish region of Valencia and also in Portugal. Then there are public and private sector trials being run at the government level, so that's really positive. But really we need to see that kind of in a more widespread way. And then I suppose one other challenge as well is that the 4-day week is not a silver bullet. So it's not going to, you know, tackle all workplace issues on its own. It can be a really, really positive policy. It can make a difference to, you know, millions of people's lives. But on its own, as an individual policy, it won't overcome issues around care, around automation and AI, around gender and race equity, accessibility, and even just pay, particularly in the cost of living crisis we're in at the moment. So it's sort of having to introduce the 4-day week would be an amazing thing, but also needs to be introduced with kind of a broader package of policies as well.
I mean, again, going back to this very small example size like survey that we did right here in the room, and assuming that a lot of people here in the room consider themselves being part of Gen Z, what role does Gen Z and their mindset specifically play in the developments around the 4-day work week? Is there anything that you could like pinpoint, like say that's something that definitely like Gen Z is contributing to anything that's happening at the moment?
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, then Gen Z is often, and younger people in the workforce are often coming in with a slightly more refreshed mindset, kind of not being as tolerant towards, you know, a lack of work-life balance, precarity, low wages, etc., etc., etc. So we are seeing that reflected in often younger people in the workforce being the driving force behind calling for a 4-day week. So one example would be I suppose, collectively within workplaces, when people are organising for a 4-day week, for example, through a trade union or through a decision-making body, it's often the youngest people in the workforce who have actually raised this and encouraged it to be discussed. Other avenues that we're seeing it in and that young people are kind of really having a voice is also collectively outside of the workplace, so via social media platforms, and also just via campaigns and activism, and kind of, yeah, trying to influence policy, that we see young people are often a really strong voice there. And then also, I suppose, a third avenue is on a more individual level, but from positions of influence. So if there are young people on trustee boards, boards of trustees, or also kind of on youth advisory boards that lots of organisations are introducing as part of, corporate social responsibility, obligations, etc., then young people can really be bringing these ideas forward for discussion and, yeah, encourage them to be moved forward in the workplace.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's something that resonates with many people here in the room, especially those of you who are already like working 4-day weeks, or like trying to implement that in your company, or have brought it up. I don't know. So yeah, if you have questions about the pilot or the 4-day work week in general, please note them down, and we'll get to them in a moment. Yeah, and also again to the audience online. If you have questions to India specifically, please make sure to specify in your comment that you'd like your question to be asked to India. Sean, wait, I can also use this mic. Yes, great. So I can actually look at you. In the preparation for this panel, we talked a lot about the intersection between like work-life balance and technology. And during the pandemic, we've seen that the way we work can change rapidly when necessary. It feels like everything is happening very fast at the moment. Now everyone's talking about AI. I mean, I feel like everyone here has probably like seen this like headline of these AI experts warning about like pretty much like the extinction of the human race through AI. Now that everyone is talking about AI and language-based models specifically, what role do you think will AI play in all of this?
Easy question, right, to start it off. Quick question for everyone in here. How many of you have used ChatGPT in the last month? Can you raise your hand? Nice. How many have used it in the last week? Raise your hand. Nice. How many have used it today? Raise your hand. I actually have it open right now, so I don't judge you whatsoever. And another question, how many of you are using large language models or AI more than Google, so more than search engines? Can you raise your hands if that's the case? So you have a question, you go to AI, raise it high, raise it high. So you go to AI instead of going to a search engine. Interesting. You might be in a minority now, but it will likely not be the case in the months ahead. Look, we're in very interesting times. And as young people, as for our generation, I think there's a lot to think about when it comes to the implications that these technologies bring to our table. There's interesting parts with regards to how it's going to impact our day-to-day work and our day-to-day work-life balance, and we'll get into that. But it's also going to bring about quite profound questions with regards to where our position in the day-to-day status quo of just running things in general actually is. Literally as a human, like where exactly is my position now? And it's AI anxiety as a feeling is something that one begins to feel when one interfaces with these technologies on a more active basis. And that happens because of the surprising and often profound implications that one recognizes when you ask deep, difficult questions to a large language model like GPT-4, for example, which is one of the most advanced models we have yet. And it's always, it's always interesting to me showing an AI to my grandmother, for example, and seeing how she reacts to it. There's an innate sense of wonder seeing your answer come out to the question that you asked. And what's scary with regards to where these technologies are going is computationally, these language models are built on trillions of points of data. And we're very close to the point where the amount of data that is stored in these large language models are so vast and so complex that in the human brain, there just aren't enough neurons to be able to store that amount of data within the human brain itself, let alone organize it, filter it, navigate it. In the case of AI that's consumer-facing, align it to ensure that the reply itself is one that's nuanced at the bare minimum, and then actually give a tangible reply. And that's what's happening today. The spark of these technologies, it happens exponentially, where as you build a model on top of a model, it just becomes cheaper, it becomes faster, it becomes scarier as well, to a certain degree. So it's very, very important, not just for entities like the European Parliament, but also for us as youth, to do two things: to experiment with these technologies and to speak about these technologies, with regards to trying to analyze what threats they might bring to the table, but also what degrees of empowerment they might bring as well. On the positive side, AI can prove to be a very valuable tool. For those of you that are students, you're probably using it to prepare for your assignments or something of the sort, or to write essays or something general in that sense, which is cool. But there's implications with regards to how it can impact areas such as research, for example, or critical thinking or Socratic questioning with regards to tough, difficult problems that it's just exciting to think about with regards to how much energy needs to go into the system and what kind of valuable outputs are returned to society in that regard. One of our first prototypes was a website called biologybuddy.ai. We launched it in Malta. It's an education app. It's completely free. About 90% of Maltese students are using it right now, and it's built on GPT-4, but it's aimed at revision, where it just gives you a breakdown of all the past papers that ever came out in the last 20 years and helps you prepare from a revision-based perspective for your examination, including mock questions, including long-form answers, point-form answers. And we've seen that there's just this is something that I've learned from philosophy, not really from higher education, but asking good questions is a really, really good way to expand your at least the answers that you can give both in dialogue and in a standardized test or anything in between. One way that we're using it in Metaverse Architects that's allowing us to be more efficient, besides the brainstorming and the ideation phase, which stands to reason in that regard, it's a language model, is, for example, for the sake of working remotely, it's extremely helpful to be able to organize calendars. We're a team that's split into 5 different continents, so it's often hard to find common time zones. Once the majority of us work remotely, we have an inbuilt AI that deals with all of our scheduling and ensures that when we're booking different meetings, we're booking them at times that caters for the time zones. That's done by an AI. All my emails are read by an AI bot that we built ourselves, which summarizes them for me, organizes them in my to-do list, adds things to my calendar if I need to note for them, and I get a summary every morning. Our meal plans are organized by AI. Our research is organized by AI. We have an inbuilt AI called Isaac that is built on Isaac Newton, or inspired by Isaac Newton, that does most of our quantitative research. Most of our papers are written by Charles, who's inspired by Charles Darwin in that regard. And this is all prompt engineering. If you go in ChatGPT right now and you give a 1,000-word long prompt trying to get a reply that's more aligned towards a specific thinker or artist or philosopher, you might be very surprised with the results that you can get from that said prompt engineering. With regards to what the future of work is going to look like, it's already clear to me, at least, that AI can automate a lot of the boring stuff. But India mentioned a really good point earlier, saying that the 4-hour work week is not a silver bullet, and I couldn't agree more. One of the founding principles we have as a company, and it's part of our culture, is we don't work for the company because we're selling our time for money. We work for the company because we're goal-oriented and objective-oriented. We're there to achieve something, we're there with a mission, we're there with a purpose, and we're united by a shared philosophy, so to speak. And AI is definitely one of those tools that I really do feel is going to push us to.
Изкуственият интелект е едно от тези средства, които ще ни помогнат да стигнем до такава степен на разбиране, че работата ни да бъде по-насочена към постигане на цели, а не отчитане на продължителност на работно време. И ето от тук идва смута. Ако сте в професия ориентирана към системата, т.е. проблем, процес, стандартизиране, решение, много е лесно да има смут във вашата работа, особено ако имате ясно разбиране каква е тая система. Има ли такава яснота? Лесно може да се автоматизира. Тук има две неща, които не трябва да изпускаме от поглед. Ако изкуственият интелект може да смути нещата, независимо от сферата, но с изкуствен интелект може да има вмешателство в работа на парламентаристи, на лекари, множество са тези сфери, но основният фактор
the application of a large language model towards a specific problem done by a human. That's the main disrupting factor in the short term. What that means is, if you're not attempting to use these large language models to your benefit, or in the bare minimum to try educate yourself on what the threats might be, you may run the risk of being disrupted because your competitors might be using that. And this doesn't need to be like a this or that or a to and fro. To quote Sun Tzu, if you know yourself but you don't know your enemy, you lose half of the battles. So even if you're an AI skeptic and are very worried about where AI is going, not familiarizing yourself with these tools just puts you at a bit of a disadvantage. Secondly, I do feel that automation itself can give us an opportunity to move higher up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, higher up to the pyramid towards self-actualization, where the majority of the rudimentary tasks that don't require a degree of creativity or asking questions that you don't necessarily know the answer to, all that can be automated, which opens a lot of new doors for us, for not just for self-expression, but for exploring our passions and exploring different ideas and giving a contribution that is far more creative or entropic or chaotic. In fact, in our company, we often see our players in our metaverse experiences when we build out games with AI agents in a village, for example. Our chaos factor is the player. We invite humans to, it's funny when you say it that way, but this is where we are. We invite humans to use our technologies because they are our entropy, they are our chaos factor. And they bring the interesting questions or the creativity factor that stress tests the large language model then and allows us to see how well it's doing.
Let me quickly cut you off here, please, because I feel like one point that probably a lot of people here in the room can relate to is the use case of ChatGPT in the classroom. I'm from Germany. I just recently had a workshop at a high school in Germany, and ChatGPT was like pretty much the one thing that everyone was talking about, and like also like kind of like a pretty like hot topic for the teachers. Like they didn't necessarily, at least from what I understood, they didn't necessarily completely get it or didn't really like understand what it was capable of, and it was like the secret like in the hallways of the school that like people were using it and the teachers still didn't really know how to handle it. So that's super interesting, and also leads me to the question of like the challenges that we're seeing, maybe like also in regards to the EU, because we're here in the Parliament. Like what are like the challenges that are coming or that we're already seeing with all of these groundbreaking technologies?
So let's go for education first. Let's deal with that. We've had a problem with our education systems for quite some time, but in truth, we've done our best. The standardized model for education is one that, unfortunately, leaves a lot of creative minds behind, but has worked from the catch-all perspective with regards to at least having some degree of standardization with regards to how you're outputting or generating skills from an economic perspective. But it's failed in multiple ways, especially in the form of kinesthetic learning, which is something that we love to work on in our company, because we build 3D immersive spaces that allow you to kinesthetically impact an environment, which we found has really interesting results on the learning process, especially when it's something related to engineering, for example, or something practical to do with your hands. I think education systems or institutions, standardized institutions will make a big mistake not looking into ChatGPT and taking it seriously. Exactly like they would have done a big mistake if they didn't promote using Google, for example, and search engines to be able to ask questions and find answers. AI can help bring a new wave of education that is cheaper, is faster, is decentralized, is accessible, potentially even free. One that can be updated independently of political bias, one that can be transparently open sourced and decentralized and shared across borders, across different groups and legislations, and there isn't really a question you can't ask. All of you know what it's like to be in a classroom, for example, where a teacher can't really deliver that message to you. Like you could the teacher could make or break the subject for you as a student. That doesn't happen with AI, because I can just ask it to talk to me as Dua Lipa if I want to, and it can give me a whole biology lesson if I want in that context. My little sister, for example, has Charles installed on her phone. So Charles Darwin is who was teaching her biology, but the way we built him was very nuanced and friendly, and was very methodological in the way he dealt with giving her answers. And I think ChatGPT is not a tool that the education system should bar, but rather encourage and learn and use it as a tool. And that's what we did see in Malta. So that was very surprising to us. In Malta, the teachers did rally behind the tool itself, behind Biology Buddy. They promoted it. They encouraged students to use it, and the feedback was phenomenal in that regard.
Thank you. I mean, the question for me is still open about what are the biggest challenges? What challenges are we facing, especially considering that we're sitting here in the European Parliament? Like something that you would say we need to consider as young Europeans, or also as MEPs that are also attending this this event.
Totally. And this applies for all of us, irrespective of our position. Obviously, we have different kinds of responsibilities, but we should all be thinking about this. I don't have all the answers. I'll start from there. And I think the hard part is practically no one does, because it's such a rapidly developing industry. The industry changes every 24 hours. There's something new, and the runaway effect is already happening. But to apply a method to the madness, I think we should start splitting the debate into two. One, analyzing the systems at play, the large language models, the data, and assessing how is data being stored, how is data being organized, how are we ensuring that we're remaining compliant with already existing regulation, like GDPR, for example, and ensuring that everything enshrined there is carried over. But then we also need to have a good conversation about the consumer-facing products as well, with regards to what our rights as consumers are when interfacing with these machine learning systems, which is very important. One must also, especially in Europe, I would say, in an open space like this, one must beg the question, what can happen from the geopolitical perspective when these tools are used maliciously? And there's real risks over there, especially in a free democratic environment where one is allowed to say anything they please. These machine learning systems can be used for a lot of good. They can be used for a lot of harm. And in between, it's going to be causing us a lot of anxiety with regards to just understanding where our place is in all of this, especially when they become more efficient in that regard. So I would, again, consumer-facing regulation, like making sure that you always know as a consumer that you're talking with an AI. That should be an obligation for every company that is providing an AI solution. You should know you're interfacing with an LLM. Ensuring that it's nuanced. So how is the training and the alignment done? How do we ensure that the output is one that is, let's say, married to the prompt, but not deviating to communicate any form of political or socio-economic bias or anything of the sort that might lead people astray. I think the third one, which would be very interesting as well, is ranking of information. At the moment, most of our information systems are built on search engine optimization, and a lot of our regulation there is prudent, but also saturated with regards to how that works. I think when you ask ChatGPT, give me 10 different academic papers. If anyone was in the workshop yesterday, that's what we were doing, looking at academic papers through scholar.google.com and just helping them write their assignments, getting all the citations and stuff. But how is it ranked? And how is that prioritized? And who gets to decide how that's prioritized? And then On the parallel to that, so that's consumer facing, then regulation on the language model. Ensuring that we don't stifle innovation because we can be left behind, and that would be a very scary reality if we are left behind. There are AIs being built in continents and countries that are not as free as ours, that pose a lot of potential threats, not just to our democracies, but to the sanity of being able to use a nuanced system to find out what is true and what is false. So I think we really need to start talking about data sovereignty, sharing of data, bringing down the great firewall, and just sharing as much information as we can with regards to the architecture of these systems, open sourcing that architecture, but also decentralizing and sharing the data.
Perfect segue. Thank you very much. Because, Mr. Grudler, are we, or is the EU ready for this?
Thank you very much, Lucas. If you permit, I will try to speak in French because we have interpretation, and you can see how we really work during our session here in the European Parliament. Or if you want to improve your French, you can also, to me directly. Sin explained, pardon, je parlais en français.
Bien. Donc, il nous a été right. So we have been told quite concretely many technical things about artificial intelligence, and I must say that yes, the EU is ready to tackle this challenge in terms of artificial intelligence. And I'm saying this here in Strasbourg, especially here Strasbourg, which is the heart of the European Parliament. Strasbourg was 550 years ago at the heart of another technological revolution, a worldwide technological revolution, because that's here that somebody called Gutenberg invented the printing press. Of course, this might not mean much, but yet we can establish this parallel with artificial intelligence. Before the printing press, in monasteries, monks were writing by hand all the manuscripts that they had, and it is how we were sharing knowledge. And when we had the printing press, we did not need to have some monks copying this, and the scientific knowledge was then spread throughout the world thanks to these printed books. So I'm establishing this parallel with artificial intelligence, which is a different revolution. We can now produce some new results with billions of non-verified data. So, of course, the scale of that change is similar, but yet the challenge is completely different. And I think that the reply that we must have for the answer for that particular challenge, and I will use a very fashionable word in France, which means that we have to do things together at the same time, en même temps in French, which means that we must at once support innovation, and yet on the other side also have some regulation that enables us to protect individual freedoms, and maybe also defend secrets which enable a nation to remain sovereign and for democracies to remain as democracies. So, to that end, I think that this en même temps, doing both things at once, this is also what the boss of ChatGPT has already asked for. He has already intervened in that sense. So, therefore, in Europe, we have an act that is being prepared. We have worked in our special commissions. We call this the IA Act, Artificial Intelligence Act, which must be voted in this very chamber in June. Next week, we will have our plenary session that will take place here, and you will therefore see something that will be a first worldwide when this will be the vote in this room, this first vote for this Artificial Intelligence Act. This contains two elements. First of all, some transparency constraints on the artificial intelligence systems, the cognitive artificial intelligence systems, generative systems such as ChatGPT. And on the other side, you will have what we call sandboxes. I don't really like that expression, but yet these are parts of regulations that will enable some companies and startups to innovate and test over a certain period and without respecting the regulations. This is simply to see innovation, to see this test and see what this could lead to, and then afterwards to change the regulation if we find that what came out is totally relevant. And so I would say that for artificial intelligence, we need to use a simple image. Oftentimes people say artificial intelligence must be forbidden, it's very dangerous, and of course the reply is no. so we cannot do so. Is it because something is dangerous that we stop using it? For example, cars can be very useful, and if we were to suppress cars because there are several accidents, would that be the solution we want? Well, the sad news is, for example, as we see in the news, is that knives are very dangerous because people can get injured or killed by knives. But yet we can also cut and chop our vegetables, we can cook, and therefore we can do many positive things with knives. So it's exactly the same thing for artificial intelligence. For example, if artificial intelligence enables us to manage the energy consumption in buildings with the Green Deal, for example, we need to leverage this and benefit from this. But if on the other side, this means that you have some biometric controls and checks in real time in order for you to be policed, to be under some kind of security from morning to night, each time, wherever you go. We do not want this. We do not want to be under a big brother, European big brother kind of situation. So therefore, we need to find where we must basically stand and where we must place that particular cursor. So, as you've understood, we're in quite a globalized world. We're not dealing just with Europe on its own, but yet Europe, when Europe says something, everybody listens. Why? Because Europe is the first market in the world. And let's not forget that when Americans are rich, that's because they trade with us. If Asians are rich, that's because they trade with us. So when Europe sets up some strong regulations, everybody listens. And that's in order for other parts of the world to be able to have access to our market, and then they apply the same thing back home. This is what we've done with the RGPD. This is what we've done with respecting personal data for all Europeans, and now the European model has imposed itself roughly throughout the world, and this is exactly what we do also when tackling climate change with the Green Deal, and which enables us to provide some manufacturing standards with low carbon emissions, and at the end of the world they want to apply the same things in a commercial manner. So by respecting our standards and regulations and European regulation, we lead to a worldwide regulation that benefits the whole of the planet.
Sorry, I was just for the interpretation. Thank you very much. And I mean, now we've heard so much about like work-life balance, 4-day work week, AI. It's many different topics. One thing that we haven't really talked about at all, which is, I would say, easily as important as everything else that we've talked about so far, is of course the climate crisis. And I mean, part of the title of this panel is also the question whether the future of the way that we work is a green future. What do you say to that as someone who who's also an expert on the climate change, climate crisis, and how that can impact the way that we'll be working? Is the future of work an eco-friendly future?
Eh bien, évidemment, le travail que nous devons mener doit respecter la planète.
Of course, what we are implementing should be to the benefit of our planet. Our objective in Europe is a Green Deal, as you know, by 2050. This is our action, our fight against the climate war. We want to be carbon neutral. That means that by 2050, we won't have more emission than in the 90s. So that's our long-term goal. But we should start now with small steps in order to reach our main objective. Within this framework, indeed, the new way that we work might be part of the solution. I was listening with great interest India. Well, of course, too prefer to work 3 or 4 days per week. But if we work only 4 days per week, we should have the same efforts as in 5 days, because it's full-time employment. So we have to be more efficient. We have to work more each day. But that means that we can reduce commuting, we reduce pollution, etc. So we can go along this path. We do know that we need to reduce the digital footprint. Unfortunately, digital use is a high proportion of our consumption in Europe, and 4% of the GIS emissions because of the data centers. As you know, we have to work on that. The footprint for digital, the carbon footprint for digital is higher than aviation carbon footprint. That is to keep in mind. And also because we will use more digital, so we have to find something for refrigerating data center or make it that those servers can bear higher temperatures. So we need to improve technology on that side. So that's part of our work, and we count on the youth, European youth, to be involved in the energetic evolutions. We have a great deal of work. I was participating in a report on clean hydrogen by 2050. Clean hydrogen, it's 500 billion euros in investment and 1 million of jobs created. That's only for one technology. We have many more technologies, but we need to entice youth to go and work to those new sectors. But before we had the understanding that big industry that was heavy, that was polluted, and you were encouraged to go in the administration, in office work, but that's not the reality for tomorrow. We have to go to those new industries to decarbonize our planet. I'm working on a document, net zero tech. So using technology, how can we manufacture and decarbonate at the same time? How to produce renewable energy devices without increasing pollution. And we do need the engineers, workers working together and trying to reduce this in order to save our planet.
I would like to hand a part of the question that you just mentioned over to India, because we just heard the question of about like efficiency, and I feel like that's something that is also in your findings, like the efficiency of the 4-day work week, whether you can do the same work in 4 days that people are doing in 5 days. I mean, I feel like that's one of the biggest concerns of like critics, being like, well, that just means that everyone has to do like longer days if you work 4 days. But that's not necessarily what you found, right?
No, exactly. So there is some in Belgium, for example, then the government's exploring this kind of compressed model where you work a 4-day week, but you do longer hours over the 4 days, so you're still working kind of a 36 to a 40-hour week. But in our work, it's a genuine reduction to at least 32 hours a week, or at most 32 hours a week. And in most of the organizations we work with, particularly for organizations that are more desk-based or project-based, kind of talking a little bit to the kind of goal orientation that Sean was mentioning earlier, it is possible for these organizations to find sufficient efficiencies to kind of reduce their numbers of hours. Some organizations will say, well, can't we just find those efficiencies and carry on working 5 days and therefore make loads more money? But one of the counters to that is generally that if your staff are stressed and burnt out, then they can't necessarily work 20% faster. But if they have better rest, on a 4-day week, the ratio of your time, if you're working 4 days to 3 days off, it's a much bigger ratio of time that you then have off. But automation definitely comes into it as well. Kind of Sean was alluding to the kind of potentials for AI to kind of liberate certain elements of our society and our working lives. And the kind of a real positive potential for AI is, as Sean said, to automate the boring tasks, and if there was, probably you'd need regulation on this rather than just sort of benevolent CEOs. But if companies can automate certain tasks, instead of sacking people or laying people off, firing people, then they could just reduce their workforce's working hours.
I love that, and it's, I feel like very promising for many people here in the room. And now is the time to open this panel to your questions, because I feel like, we've seen in the very beginning that many of you have an opinion on the 4-day work week, for example. But we've heard not only about the 4-day work week, we've also heard about AI, about ChatGPT, about the climate crisis, about many different aspects of the way that we'll be working in the coming months and years. So if there's anyone here in the hemicycle who has a question for one of the panelists, to all of the panelists, please raise your hand. Again, to the people online, drop your questions in the comments on Facebook. And to the people on in the gallery, I see you. Oh, yeah, I see some hands. Number 249. Can you also see your own numbers? No? Yeah. I think you have to turn on your mic. We can't hear you, unfortunately.
C'est bon? Ok, merci beaucoup. Je suis Anselmo.
Me, I'm an activist for climate. I'm working in Strasbourg, and we use AI to protect our vegetal heritage in cities. So my question relates to AI. The digital sectors use 10% of the overall consumptions of energy and 4% CO2 emission. If we go further with the AI, it means that we will need more servers, which will in turn generate more emissions, and that will contribute to the warming of our planet. Is this the object of some research? The object of research? Have we thought about it? Do we have studies, or has it been taken into account? Now, regarding our social organization, as we have social cohesion, social relation. Maybe AI will set us apart. We will have less communications. If I can just ask ChatGPT, I won't go to my friend and ask the questions. So there will be a social impact of that AI development as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One quick remark. I just got a note that's probably targeted at me, but I'll just mention it to everyone. Interpreters are having problems with speakers that are talking too fast. Probably me, but just for everyone in the room, a reminder, speak slowly, because there's interpretation that needs some time to catch up. But yeah, the question, interesting intersection of climate change and AI. Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I'm just going to take the point on higher degrees of emissions as we become more reliant on AI. And just to clarify that, I understand the concern, but it's somewhat incorrect. If you look at the Stanford Llama model, for example, that just came out, that's GPT 3.5, it was done with $200 and about 100th of the computational power. In fact, if you saw the launch of iOS 17, you'll have a GPT in your keyboard just because of, that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to talk about. The computational cost of these LLMs are shrinking rapidly, not increasing. And that's where, from the perspective of science fiction, is where the singularity is. But that's the accelerating problem, that the computational cost is reducing. It costed millions to create GPT 3.5, but it costed Stanford about $200 to $400 of training, and again, a fraction of the emissions. So that's, I think, important to keep in mind.
Alors, peut-être quelques éléments complémentaires. Il est certain que...
In addition, of course, the more we will use digital, the more we will consume energy and electricity. Therefore, potentially increase our emission. If we haven't had more green energy before that, and I think we have to put this in the context, a global context. On the world, 1 billion people do not have access to electricity, and another billion has some access to electricity. However, they don't have access to healthcare because there are no hospitals, and those healthcare do not have electricity. So I believe it is of utmost importance to grant access to electricity to all. And of course, there is a risk to generate more CO2, hence the need to do several things at the same time. Concurrently, we have to increase electrical production and decarbonate it to allow to equalize the situation all over the world in terms of access to energy. Now, regarding the refrigeration of servers, many use water instead of refrigerating devices using electricity, but water becomes rare. So we have to keep this in mind as well. So we have sort of different solutions, and I asked for the launch of a European solution to store data in space. So it seems strange, we cannot do it, but now with the satellites, we can send data from one satellite to another without it being stored in one gigantical servers, and people are telling me, you want to pollute space. No, this is not the idea. The idea is to have less of this on Earth and trying to reduce climate warming. I'm part of IRIS 2 involved in telecommunication satellites created for Europe and Africa. Therefore, we will cover the entire African continent, and with communication systems, the internet and remote areas will have internet connections. They have to be, it's like an umbrella system that will allow even remote villages in Africa to have internet connection. We've done it not only for Europe, but for the African continent as well, in coherence with our African development purposes.
Thank you very much. I just got another message that's important. It's not about me speaking too fast again. It's about something else. We are facing some technical issues with the streaming. So for everyone who's joining online, it's possible that you may experience an interruption during the panel. I think technicians are at the moment only showing a fixed shot of the panelists and are working on fixing that. Thank you for your understanding. Next question. There are many questions. Number 10.
Does it work? First, I wanted to ask about Charles and the biology AI. If we can get that, if it's open source and you have an address for us.
So the prompt engineering isn't open source yet, but if you're a developer, it's effectively a GPT-4 API and some good alignment with regards to ensuring that any output is regressively, actively compared to the supplementary data set, which is just built on every single past paper that came out. If you want to see it, you can go to biologybuddy.ai. We're planning a European-wide rollout by the start of next semester, both for universities and for high schools. But we're still gathering teachers to help us train it effectively, because the training process is one that we did with teachers to just ensure that it's on the 90% accuracy point. Open sourcing it for us won't be a problem at all. It's just built on open source tech already, just like Llama, for example. With regards to Charles, if you want to, I have Jarvis on my phone, for example, and it does most of my day-to-day tasks, which is great. So Siri is kind of upgraded for me, and it just interfaces directly with GPT-4. What you need there is a good prompt. So try and give 500 words of context in relation to what kind of reply you'd like. And it's also very I suffer from ADHD, for example. It really helps me when I tell my AI models that I do have ADHD. It does take that into consideration and does organize my my data in a way that's just easier for me to read and use. So I highly recommend trying to be specific and prompt engineering, looking at prompt engineering as a skill and building that out to see what works for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there are more questions. Yeah, many questions. Okay. I can't see all the numbers, unfortunately. I'll go to number 247.
Okay, first of all, thank you everyone who is here and you for sharing with us all that knowledge. My question is going to be related with the 4-week working days, 4 days working week, because what happens with education, with the students, high school students, primary students, university students, the majority of you have been a student, and you know that you are not a student 5 days a week, just 6 hours. You are a student 6 days a week, 24 hours. So it's going to work the 4 days work week in the educational world, because we need to reduce the amount of time that we give lessons to the students to be able to achieve this 4 days week. But by reducing time, we are charging more the students, and we are reducing also quality. Are we making the education slower or maybe worse? Thank you.
Great, thank you for your question. Yeah, obviously education is going to be one of the more complicated sectors to transition to a 4-day week, much more complicated than consultancy or tech or something like that. There have been examples of schools moving to a 4-day week. I think there's over 1,000 schools in the United States who are working a 4-day week, but that was partially in response to staffing shortages. But there's different ways that a 4-day week in schools has been modelled and done in practice. So there's a school in London, for example, collection of schools who work a 4.5-day week, but that's for the staff more. So the staff work a 4.5-day week, and then on Friday afternoons there are kind of enrichment activities available for the students. They're not compulsory, but it's more for the parents who then can't, provide childcare or collect their children, particularly for primary age children, so younger, kind of 11 and younger. So there's, access to a school gym, there's sports activities, there's creative activities, arts, those kind of things that sit outside of the curriculum. Then there's also, the modelling for reducing the working week, the school week and the educational week for students as well. That would obviously require an overhaul of curriculums. In the UK, there's quite specific requirements for the number of hours the students must be in class and education per year and per week at the moment, so that would need an overhaul. But I think that education more broadly needs to be reviewed, kind of as Sean alluded to again. The kind of standardized exam-based methods of education that we have at the moment are severely lacking, and that moving potentially on a society level towards a 4-day week would afford a really good opportunity to put kind of a refreshed review of how we approach education, how the school week is looked at, and also to integrate, the opportunities, again, that things like automated tools could provide.
Thank you, India. Before I get to one more question here from the room, I have a question from the online audience. This question comes from Ronel Garcia from Spain, and it's a question that I would like to address to Mr. Grudler. The question from Ronel is, technological changes, the economic crisis and the ecological transition are transforming the European labour market. Many traditional professions are dying out or require new skills, while others are emerging with great demand and potential. Given this scenario, is it necessary for the European Union to support workers and companies to adapt to the challenges and opportunities of the future, and how is the EU doing that?
This is a very good question indeed, because we're all in a never-changing world, and Europe is ever-changing too. I spoke earlier on about 1 million new jobs in the hydrogen sector, and it's clear that some jobs will be created in that particular hydrogen sector, but there will also be some training required in order to enable some disappearing professions to maybe merge towards the hydrogen sector or others. This is the case, for example, for those in Poland, where 40% of the energy comes from coal, and coal is the most polluting source of energy. This represents 1,000 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour of produced electricity, and therefore we will close some coal mines, and these jobs have no future. So all the work that will be undertaken with the European funds, such as the Fund for a Fair Transition, will enable to finance the training for these workers, for them to be able to have a new qualification, so they can still work in the energy sector, for example, if we change from the coal sector to hydrogen sector, and this will remain their sector of occupation, but yet with this particular adaptation. Now, also the working time can be something that can be studied, especially in the sectors in which I work, for example, with the Net Zero Industry Act. There are many sectors where we struggle to recruit some youngsters, and it's true that there is an advantage, and I'll come back to the 4-day week. And with artificial intelligence, the advantage is that it might be easier to maybe recruit people, maybe by deploying 2 teams, one at the beginning of the week, one at the end of the week. There could be some economic models and business models that could attract some youngsters on some industrial sectors that really are full of promise for you and very important for us, because if Europe does not manage to develop its own industry, its own technology and its own strategic autonomy, then we're at risk of fully depending on other continents, and especially America and Asia, who are our competition economically. So therefore we need to accelerate in that sense. There was a Fair Transition Fund which has been set up in order to come out of the coal sector. There is also the Climate Fund to enable us to adapt to certain things with some European alliances, such as for the climate, for hydrogen, for photovoltaic sector. These are some kind of helps and support that can enable our industry to carry on changing and enable people to work in new sectors.
We have time for one more quick question. I know there are so many questions. I will be here at the European Youth event for the rest of the weekend. I think Sean definitely as well. Will you be here later today?
Yeah, the rest of today I'm around.
Great.
Yeah.
So definitely approach us. I don't know, Mr. Goodlau.
Sorry,
Yeah.
But back on Monday, but you will not be there.
I know on Monday I'll be already back in Berlin. So yeah, one last question, and please keep it short, and also to the panelists that it goes to, keep it short, please. Number 70.
Yes, real quick. So regarding AI, AI is feeding in the data that is extremely biased towards Western countries, like where the data come from that feeds AI is extremely biased. So how, what are the techniques to avoid some sort of decoupling, or different parts of the world having very different models, or how do we tackle that? What's your take? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I wouldn't necessarily agree with you, though, in the form of bias, in the sense, I think GPT-4 is extremely nuanced. I think OpenAI has done a very good job in aligning that model to at least feel nuance in that regard. I think sometimes we misinterpret what the bias could look like. With regards to, for example, length of replies, I remember that was something that was quite a few people were arguing about. How one aligns it has to deal with both the RLHF, like the human feedback that you're giving to the AI when training it, and it's also very architectural as well. So how many degrees of alignment are you taking, and which direction are you attempting to take it as well? What you mentioned there, though, is the ultimate headache. How do you deal with the bias? In one shape or form, there's always going to be bias. One must also keep in mind that biases come out if you do ask a bias-oriented question. It's very hard to ask an open question in that regard that isn't biased. And then you also have another factor called temperature, which is like the chaos factor for the reply. If your temperature is at 0, the reply will always be the same. If your temperature is at 0.7, it deviates a lot. That is what regulators should be talking about. Who decides on the alignment process and how those systems are built, and ensuring that that temperature is kept to as much as possible an unbiased scenario.
Thank you very much. I do have some more housekeeping announcements at the end, but before we come to that, unfortunately, we will have to actually close the panel at exactly 2:45. I would like to hear once more from all three panelists. I asked all three of you to prepare like a very short statement answering the question, where do we go from here? India, would you like to start?
My answer is probably somewhat unsurprising, but it relates to the 4-day week, and maybe slightly cheeky coming from the UK, or someone coming from the UK, given that we're not in the EU anymore, but would be for the European Parliament to encourage member states to trial at the national level public and private 4-day week experiments, and also for young people to be advocating for this as well, via the 3 ways I mentioned earlier, kind of inside and outside of workplaces, and a national, sectoral, or even company level.
Thank you. Sean, your answer.
Well, in the short term, I'm going to be here. And if any of you want to jump on me and argue or debate or anything of the sort, all my time is dedicated to anyone who's curious today. So I was a participant 2 years ago. I'm here now to try and give as much, not feedback, but just be here, be present and try to give value back in some shape or form. So please come debate me. Please come argue. I'm uncertain. I don't know where we're going. I really don't, and I don't think most people don't know either, because there's so much uncertainty in the industry. What I do feel is that we're going to have quite a lot of anxiety. This is quite an exciting time to be alive, and excitement can exist in 2 forms, positive or anxious-oriented. I think we just need to be diligent. We need to try and understand these technologies as well as possible. Let's try and move towards using them towards reaping the benefits of them, but not being naive enough to ignore the alarms and the potential malicious ways they could be used as well. But at the bare minimum, at least it's exciting. At least it's something to look forward to. It's at minimum a mild degree of interest. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Grutler, where do we go from here?
Eh bien, on part ensemble avec des jeunes motivés, des jeunes qui doivent être force d'engagement et de proposition. Moi, je vais très souvent sur le terrain à travers toute l'Europe et je constate, notamment en rencontrant les jeunes Européens, qu'à chaque fois, il y a vraiment beaucoup d'idées.
And I note when I meet young Europeans that oftentimes there are many ideas. So, for example, the future of work, this is your future, how you will work. You have some ideas in terms of climate change, in terms of digitalisation. This will change matters. You have some ideas. You must do so and proceed with this. Let's not forget that tomorrow's world belongs to you. You mustn't have any complex regarding what's in place, such as the European Parliament or the national governments, etc. Tomorrow's world belongs to you. These people will leave at some stage. I will leave so, and then your children will replace you. This is life. But what I would like is for us to remain optimistic, and that when we will leave this place, we will have a positive mindset. We could always lament ourselves from morning to night and do absolutely nothing. And the solution is to act. And I will finish by quoting a French author called Albert Camus. He stated that when there is no hope left whatsoever, our duty is to invent such hope. And therefore, I think that we must work with that mindset in order to invent such hope for a better future tomorrow in your hands. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. And that's a perfect transition to, again, coming back to the Ideas Hub that's right next to the Hemicycle. I mentioned it in the beginning. I will mention it again because it is such a cool thing. Share your ideas on youthideas.eu or go to the I-2023 Ideas Hub right next to the Hemicycle. A few last notes from my side. Please go and check out the iVillage. I'm sure many of you have already been there. If you don't have any more activities planned here in the Parliament, please go to the village. I don't know if you've seen the lines outside. There's a lot of, many people waiting to get inside. We only have a limited capacity here, and we really want to get everyone the chance to get in, to give everyone the chance to get in. And also, another part, like another reason to go check out the village is our little Enter tent, some shameless self-promotion, if you don't mind. If you don't know what Enter is, we're not only media partner here at we're also a pan-European social media project. We're co-funded by the European Commission, and we make what I would say is great journalistic social media content. That's what I have to say as managing editor. But if you want to check it out yourself, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. If you type in ENTR, enter, it should pop up, you should find us. Also check out the I2023 social media channels to keep posted on what's happening, and share your I2023 moments with the hashtag I2023. And last but not least, please leave the hemicycle through the exits here behind the podium, not through the exits where you came in. Make sure to give us feedback to this panel or on this activity on the post-event survey. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to this fantastic panel. And I wish us all an inspiring rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.